He stood 6'7", scarred and feared. When Heydrich was gone, Himmler turned to one man to control the Reich's security empire, Ernst Kaltenbrunner. At Nuremberg, he insisted he knew nothing. The files said otherwise. So how did an obscure Austrian lawyer rise to command the Reich's most feared security machine? Ernst Kaltenbrunner was born on 4 October 1903 in Ried im Innkreis, northern Austria. After secondary school, he studied law at the University of Graz, earning his degree in the late 1920s. He joined the Austrian Nazi Party in 1930, a time when membership carried real personal risk. The party was banned, forcing its operations underground. In 1931, he entered the SS, becoming part of a small but growing Austrian network aligned with Himmler's expanding organization in Germany. Kaltenbrunner stood out immediately, tall, scarred, and forceful. But what mattered most was his willingness to take risks, organize clandestine cells, and enforce discipline inside the illegal movement. Throughout the early 1930s, he worked in the Austrian SS leadership, developing ties with Theodor Habicht and other senior activists. The Austrian government launched periodic crackdowns on Nazi activity, and Kaltenbrunner was arrested more than once. In 1934, after the failed Nazi coup attempt in Vienna, he was detained and questioned. In January 1935, he was sentenced to several months in prison for illegal political activity. Far from discouraging him, the experience strengthened his commitment. Everything changed with the Anschluss in March 1938, when Austria was incorporated into Hitler's Reich. Kaltenbrunner moved instantly into official power. He became state secretary for public security in Vienna and higher SS and police leader for Austria, placing him at the center of early security operations. From Vienna, he coordinated police directives, intelligence reporting, and cooperation with German authorities. By 1939, Kaltenbrunner had earned the rank of SS Brigadeführer, and his responsibilities widened through the war's early years. He gained a reputation as a strict administrator who followed orders closely and expected the same from others. Personnel files from the SS emphasize his organizational discipline and ideological reliability. Traits Himmler favored in senior positions. Kaltenbrunner's rise was not inevitable, but it was steady. His network inside the Austrian SS, his proven loyalty, and his role during the years of illegality positioned him for one of the most powerful posts in the Third Reich. Everything shifted after Reinhard Heydrich died from wounds sustained in the Prague attack in June 1942. His death left a vacuum at the top of the Reich's security empire. For months, Himmler hesitated to name a successor, but by January 1943, Kaltenbrunner was summoned to Berlin. Himmler appointed him chief of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, the nerve center of the regime's intelligence and security system, an appointment that would define his legacy. When Kaltenbrunner arrived in Berlin to take command of the RSHA on 30 January 1943, he stepped into a position shaped by two powerful predecessors, Reinhard Heydrich and Heinrich Himmler. Heydrich had built the RSHA into a centralized security empire, combining the Gestapo, Kripo, and SD into one organization. The RSHA was vast. It managed domestic intelligence, foreign espionage, internal policing, and the coordination of camp-related security operations. As its new chief, Kaltenbrunner oversaw key figures already embedded in the institution: Heinrich Himmler, who ran the Gestapo, and Walter Schellenberg, who directed foreign intelligence. Kaltenbrunner's role was less about designing new structures and more about enforcing control, issuing directives, and keeping the organization functioning as the war turned against Germany. His relationship with Himmler was central to this role. Himmler valued subordinates who followed orders precisely and avoided internal power struggles. Kaltenbrunner fit that profile, and archival correspondence shows. Himmler increasingly delegated internal security matters to him. The RSHA chief handled major policy communications, from reprisal guidelines to interrogation instructions. His signature appears across RSHA files, even though he later claimed at Nuremberg that his role was purely legal. Despite formally reporting to Himmler, Kaltenbrunner held more influence than his title suggested. Declassified accounts from the war's final months even show Himmler wary of crossing him. Asked in April 1945 to meet Swedish delegates, Himmler reportedly told Walter Schellenberg, "And how am I going to do that with Kaltenbrunner around?" Schellenberg himself considered Kaltenbrunner one of his most dangerous enemies, entrusted with investigating the July 20th plot. Kaltenbrunner often bypassed Himmler to report directly to Hitler, spending long hours with him in the war's final months, access few others enjoyed. Inside the RSHA, Kaltenbrunner's interactions with Heinrich Himmler were particularly important. Himmler had deep institutional knowledge and controlled most on-the-ground operations of the security police. Some scholars argue whether Kaltenbrunner truly commanded Himmler, or whether Himmler operated with a level of autonomy built under Heydrich. Early in Kaltenbrunner's tenure, Himmler's experience gave him considerable leverage. By 1944-45, as Himmler relied more heavily on Kaltenbrunner, the balance shifted. Kaltenbrunner chaired meetings, issued directives, and increasingly shaped the security agenda. Foreign intelligence was another area under his supervision. Walter Schellenberg, head of the SD's foreign branch, Amt 6, often portrayed himself as independent, but RSHA records show Kaltenbrunner reviewing and approving major initiatives. Their relationship became increasingly important as the regime sought diplomatic leverage and back-channel contacts late in the war. The turning point came during 1944. After the failed 20 July plot, security controls tightened across the Reich. Kaltenbrunner played a key role in directing the response, coordinating investigations and arrests through the RSHA. His administrative oversight deepened as Himmler began dividing his attention between the declining fronts and attempts at separate negotiations. In this environment, Kaltenbrunner became one of the most powerful men in Berlin, responsible for managing the internal machinery of a collapsing state. But as the military situation deteriorated, even the RSHA's reach began to fracture, and Kaltenbrunner prepared for a different kind of struggle, one for survival. By January 1945, Kaltenbrunner oversaw an RSHA facing the same crisis as the rest of Hitler's Reich. The front lines were collapsing, communication networks were strained, and ministries in Berlin operated under constant pressure. Yet Kaltenbrunner continued issuing directives on security interrogations and evacuations. His position remained significant even as the system around him weakened. For the Allies, he was still one of the most important figures they hoped to capture. The Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin in early 1945. Kaltenbrunner increasingly split his time between the capital and locations in southern Germany and Austria. RSHA files show that he held meetings in Prince Albrechtstrasse in Berlin as late as March, but he also traveled to Munich-Salzburg and ultimately the Alpine region, where several high-ranking officials believed a final defensive zone, the so-called Alpine Redoubt, might be formed. The idea was unrealistic, yet it influenced the movements of multiple SS and Nazi leaders. By April 1945, Kaltenbrunner had relocated to Alto See, a remote area in the Austrian Alps. A declassified CIA historical report from 22nd September 1993 titled The Last Days of Kaltenbrunner reconstructs his movements during these final weeks. It describes a pattern of shifting between mountain chalets, relying on loyal SS officers and attempting to preserve influence, even as the Reich collapsed. From Alto See, he continued sending messages to remaining RSHA units and issued instructions related to security and intelligence operations. Some sources claim he tried to position himself as a figure able to negotiate with Western forces, though scholars question how serious or realistic these efforts were. On 8 May 1945, Germany surrendered. Kaltenbrunner was still hiding in the Alto See region. 4 days later, on 12th of May, agents of the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) closed in. Acting on information from locals and intercepted messages, they searched a cluster of alpine lodges. Inside one cabin, they found Kaltenbrunner among a group of SS officers and medical personnel. He claimed to be a doctor and offered a false name in an attempt to avoid identification. The deception did not last long. As the prisoners were led back toward town, 2 women recognized him: Countess Gisela von Westarp, his last mistress, and Erich Scheidler, the wife of his adjutant. They reportedly called out to both men and embraced them. That moment exposed his identity. U.S. troops immediately placed him under arrest. Within hours, he was transported to an interrogation center for questioning. The arrest at Altaussee ended his freedom, but the final chapter would unfold not in the Alps, but in a courtroom built to reveal the truth behind the regime he once helped command. When Ernst Kaltenbrunner arrived at Nuremberg in late 1945, he stood out among the defendants. At 6'7", thin from months on the run and marked by a deep dueling scar, he was the highest-ranking SS official in the dock. Medical evaluations noted his high blood pressure and recurring headaches, but mentally he appeared sharp and prepared. From the first interrogations, he laid out a clear strategy: deny operational responsibility and shift blame upward to Himmler and downward to his subordinates. Kaltenbrunner claimed he had served as a legal advisor, with limited authority over security operations. According to him, the RSHA's vast system spanning the Gestapo, Kripo, and SD was run by Heinrich Himmler and others without his direct involvement. He insisted he did not control camp-related matters, did not oversee interrogations, and did not issue key orders. But prosecutors began countering these statements with documents from the RSHA archives, many bearing his signature or initials. These included directives on reprisals, prisoner classifications, and coordination between intelligence and police divisions. Witness testimony also contradicted him. Former RSHA officers describe meetings chaired by Kaltenbrunner, where decisions on internal security were discussed. Foreign intelligence chief Walter Schellenberg testified about Kaltenbrunner's involvement in late-war political maneuvers. Camp officials stated they received communications from RSHA offices under his authority. While some details remain debated, especially regarding how much autonomy Müller retained, archival evidence demonstrated that Kaltenbrunner exercised substantial administrative power. A January 1946 article published in the New York Times added another dimension. It described an eyewitness account placing Kaltenbrunner at a site where executions had taken place. The defense argued the testimony was unreliable and that he had been present as a legal observer. Prosecutors countered that his presence reflected direct engagement in security operations. Throughout the trial, Kaltenbrunner maintained he had attempted to restrain more extreme actions ordered by Himmler. These claims were tested against RSHA documents and intercepted communications. The court concluded he had not demonstrated meaningful opposition to policies carried out under the RSHA. Cross-examinations revealed further contradictions when confronted with reports signed by him.